that abutted it. You know, it was not in a good location for them in that county area. They were working with us. You know, they were working with us. I wouldn't say that they're the driver. I would say that, you know, the board figured that if we could find a new location for that substation, that it would mitigate some of the impact on the total project to the entire community. So,
just briefly, and I'm not trying to prolong this, but I guess I was wondering exactly what it mitigated, because you did have to pay $2.1 million for the new property, whereas I think the other one could have already owned or could have been a swap for a much lesser cost, if any dollars. Just briefly, so the public understands why was that decision made?
Literally, I think that there were some plans there. I think that there were people, entities that were planning uses for Heber Light and Power's property that's located there by the event center and the train. You know, the politicians sit on multiple boards. You know, train board. You know, county council. You know, I had, you know, clear direction to go find a different location for that substation.
So it wasn't a decision made by you, it was made by the board, and it sounds like there were other plans for that property. Your pay grade.
Yes, I was doing what I was told.
What about land for the substation near the Heber Valley sanitary sewage plant? You look out there?
Yeah. Multiple times. Talked to multiple property owners. You know, none were really willing to sell. I mean, one went into lengthy, you know, conversations back and forth, but, you know, I could never get like a written counter offer. You know, we did make offers and never got any type of serious written counter offer. You know, it was just, you know, week after week, no results. So we continued looking, talking to various property owners, and several weren't really interested in selling in that general area, and then one popped on 650 South there that was like, yeah, so we bought it.
And it's also worth noting that we bought that at appraised value.
Yeah, that was at appraised value.
I'm assuming you did.
You said that.
No.
But there was no county land available out by the sewer?
Not that the sewer district felt like they could get rid of that was buildable for this type of project. And so, you know, we explored all of that with the sewer district, and, you know, they were more than willing to work with us on the other piece that was down there by them that was held by a private owner. They were willing to work with us, do some land swaps with us if we could have made that work, but that property owner, we just could never get a written counter out of him. He wouldn't accept our offer, so.
Can you just explain very briefly how you came upon this land with Riley Probst property that you actually purchased? Did you contact him?
No, we contacted, we heard, I don't know who I heard it from. I think I heard it from a worker, just an employee, that he was moving to Montana. And so we reached out to him, and you know, he immediately wanted to talk to us. So no, that's literally how it happened.
You got an appraisal on the property?
We got an appraisal on the property, and he accepted the appraised value.
I mean, I think you, of all the people here, you probably know more about this project than anyone, for good reason, in your position. Do you feel like, given everything you've seen, that that's the best location for the substation?
Yeah, it's a much better location from just a pure electric standpoint than the other ones that we were looking at, because we had to build, you know, a lot of line to get into them. We had to do a lot of earthwork to make it flat and level. And so there was a lot of cost associated with it. You know, through the mitigation process, my board of directors had already directed me to bury a lot of distribution line to, you know, lower pole heights, get spans longer. The cost is becoming more and more, you know, I need to control costs. I have that obligation to my ratepayers to make sure that I'm looking for good locations that are cheap and easy to build on. Because none of this stuff is cheap. The overhead's not cheap either, you know, none of this stuff is cheap, so.
I think that's all I have.
I'm good.
Thank you, John. So, as far as public comment, Mr. Tatton, our recorder, indicated that public comment has been closed in previous meetings. However, we have received 2 letters recently, and with permission of the commission, I would like to inquire if those 2 letter writers would want to stand and address them. Sir, state your name, please.
Yes, I'm David George, and I wrote you a letter about the right adjacent to the substation across from Riley Probst's property. You know, I think there are a couple of key words here that have been touched on, and I think the questioning that you've done has been very good. One is easements. Easements are not sufficient in many of these areas because of the wider easement requirements. So this could become a really big problem. And Commissioner Hendricks talked, and Commissioner Jewkes both talked about the impact on property values. Beaver Light and Power and Rocky Mountain Power countered by saying that they had an ombudsman process, but they kind of deviated from the real question, which was not about easements, but it was about property adjacent to this and properties that are impacted by the view. I'm particularly impacted. I don't think there's anybody on the entire route that has going to see more effect than I will. I'm across from a power station, which will be probably a de facto zoned commercial. I've got power lines on 2 sides of my property. I agree, the power line would be across the street. Yes, sir?
You don't have that now, but you would if this goes through.
I have it, that's right. If this goes through, exactly, there'll be another power line to the east. The exact routing has not been noted. And if you pay attention very carefully to the diagrams, there was a piece of city property where there's a break in the power line. That would probably be an easement, probably close to my property, but I can tell you that I have no interest in providing easements for this. So, you know, I've looked at a couple of things. Can I turn this on just for a second? Look, I'm not going to read what I wrote, but I will give this to you as sort of an adjunct, and I know time is limited on some of this. What this is a, oh, that one, please. Yeah, okay, so this is the Probst property here. This is my this is my property here.
With the one in the red square?
The red square is the Probst property.
The red border or the George property?
The George property is mine.
Yeah.
And the red box with the black is where you plan to site this substation. There are other places, I think, that haven't been thoroughly examined. And I know they went through a process, but certainly around the sewage plant down here, there's plenty of land. And I don't think, to be honest, I don't think that this was pursued with enough vigor, given the impact this is going to have and all these associated power lines. There's also this property right across from the ballpark. You know, that's county land. I don't know why it couldn't be built there. I don't know why it couldn't be built where this trailer park is, which is isolated from the rest of the event grounds. You know, that's quite a bit of area. Or maybe even up here at our famous Dirt Dogs location, which is not exactly, maybe that's a city. So, but look, I won't try to go through all of this, but it seems to me that there are a couple of options that really haven't been properly covered, and one of those is to consider putting this main power line, 2 lines together along the north line. why do we even have to have main power lines on the south line? Particularly if you had a substation up near the ballparks. You know, I don't think the ball players would probably mind. They've probably been trained to keep their eye on the ball, and that's not something that I think Huber Light and Power and Rocky Mountain Power have done very well. So I think that's a possibility also. But what we're really looking at here is, I think, the reason this substation is here is probably future plans. I think this is designed to provide power to the south end of the valley as that matures. And I think that if that's really a considerable demand in the future for Heber Light and Power, maybe the routing through Midway and through the south fields needs to be re-examined. So I guess what I'd ask is, I'd like to see some sort of continuance so that we could take a look at some of these options. I think the cost of easements in particular is going to be a big problem. And I'd suggest that these guys go out and try to get easements, see where they go with this. Maybe they'll find that easements are going to be really hard, and they're going to have to go through a whole process of really fighting with this. And then they should also ask the question, if this was underground, would the easements be granted for free, or would they, you know, as opposed to paying some undetermined amount? Thank you, thank you. So anyway, look, if you guys do approve this, I'd suggest that, you know, there are mitigating conditions that have to be put on this. One of the mitigating conditions should be that this huge substation, and by the way, it's 3 to 4 times larger than the one at Utah Valley. It's a couple of times bigger than the one at the junction of Highway 40 and the road to Camas. In fact, it's only a little bit smaller than the mega substation on 90th South in Salt Lake. This is a huge, huge substation. So how to mitigate the effect of that? A 10-foot wall doesn't cut it. You know, I think there have to be some really serious attempts at mitigation. You know, with foliage, and maybe even they need to bury the lines in this area so that it's not a compounded, you know, impact. It's bad enough having a substation and a plethora of high-powered lines through there, to me, is a real problem. So thank you for your time. I will leave a copy of this with you, which also contains this little map.
Thank you.
Any questions?
You want to go?
Yeah.
I understand your primary concern would be that the substation is going to be located near your home.
Right.
And that's an impact that I think is, you agree, is particular to you. Yes. It impacts you more than most other neighbors. I think it's probably true that if we move that substation somewhere else, there'd probably be another neighbor like you who would come in and say almost the same thing.
Maybe the ball field.
So maybe that's a problem that we're going to have no matter what happens to some degree. Have you talked with Rocky Mountain Power or Heber Light and Power about mitigating some of these impacts that you talked about?
No, I just learned about this when I went to the Heber Light and Power board meeting last week. And that's when I first saw this. I saw that there was going to be one in the 650 vicinity, but the original planning commission letter that went out was very vague. It said on 12th West, 650 South, and instead it's quite a bit further west than that. So even they, you know, I guess they purchased the property, but didn't want to go with the specificity. So I waited until I went to the board meeting, and I did speak to. We had a very nice conversation about the impact with the board members of Heber Light and Power. I think it was last week. And they all agreed that it was a significant impact. And I got some quite nice letters from Mayor Potter and Mayor Johnson on this issue.
Well, I'm glad to hear that sincerely. I just want to make sure I understand your position correctly and that I have the information I need to be able to make a decision here. One of which is the size of the substation. I think that's a good point. I'm not sure I realize exactly how big it would be. Do you have any reason to believe that the size would be different depending on its location? Or would it be located in one of the other red boxes, with the sewer farm? Would the size change?
Yeah, I don't know that. That's actually a question for these other guys. I think the key part of that question is when they were originally proposing this, I don't think it was quite this large. But maybe they were not thinking of the expansion along Highway 189. I mean, I think that's probably an underserved area. I'm guessing. They'd have to confirm but I don't see any large power lines going down there. Maybe they're there.
Do you know how tall the particular lines are going to be close to your home?
Well, funny you bring up lines, and I guess a clarification here. So, at the Midway Planning Commission meeting, the question of lines, the pole height came up, and somebody had a picture of a pole, and they said, this pole's 55 feet. And they said, and how high are the new poles? They're going to be 75 feet. And they said, is that 55 feet above the ground? Oh, no, that's actually the original pole length. So it's buried 10% of the length plus 2.5 feet. So the 55 feet becomes 47.5 feet. So it was one of those little carefully, you know, it's a 55-foot pole, correct? But it's not 55 feet above the ground. So the actual ratio of the pole height to the other height. Now look, they've done a good job of getting these poles reduced. On 650 South, we don't have, they decided that we're not going to get the benefit of buried distribution, because I guess there are not enough of this. Other areas are getting buried distribution. I don't know how that decision is made, because some of these areas are not very populated. And areas that have quite a few people, like 650 South and Southfield that looks over that, for some reason they're not burying the distribution lines there. I think it's probably just trying to force the hand economically on this.
So I guess I'm trying to understand, other than the substation, what particular impact around you are you,
Well, I've got,
speaking to? Are you speaking to the pole height as well?
you know, the pole height, as I just said, is, I think it's excessively high and a little bit unfair that they're not burying the distribution lines. I'm concerned about the routing right next to my property, which, if they follow the bypass road easement, I can tell you right now, is going to be a major problem, because the city failed to secure a sufficient easement for the road. And this is a big problem for them. Right? So they've already said, we had a zoning discussion, and they wouldn't, some of this, more of this undeveloped land, which is the east of my place, they wouldn't take that and allow, and expand the easement. They said, no, no, we can't do that, because the developer will be unhappy. So when we get to the bypass road, we'll just take 30 feet of your land. And my comment is, I don't think so. You know, I think you're setting yourself up for a big problem legally with that stuff.
I don't think this, as I read, I don't think our body has any right to say anything about easements over private property, and they'll have to acquire. Would you agree that if we give them a conditional use permit and then they're unable to get the easement, isn't that good for you? Because then they can't go.
Sure, sure. I think that would be a good thing, and that's why I think that a continuance and ask them to go ahead and see what they can do on the easements. I mean, how big a problem is this? Volt's position will be, I think, that the easements cost is seriously underrated. It will probably be much more than Rocky Mountain Power, Heber Light and Power anticipate. Remember, Rocky Mountain Power really has to pay for this, because Heber Light and Power, for the most part, has easements for their power. It's the increase that has to happen. So, you know, that could easily close the difference between underground and above ground. And it's good to talk about, you know, the total cost of underground. I think most of us are practical. There are certainly areas, at least from my point of view, that it's clearly going to be probably most effective to have above ground cables in our little section of Wyoming where there's nobody, some cows. Those areas are probably going to be okay. But I think the areas where you're surprised that the county wants these big lines right by the ballpark. You know, it's a big visual, and down 650 and through Midway. So maybe the actual cost of burying these things is only a fraction of the stated cost differential when you include easements and only partial underground burying. So.
Well, you said that you're not going to give an easement to these guys for a line. What if they said they would bury it? Would you give them an easement then?
Well, I think that's an interesting position. Yes, I don't think they would probably want to bury it through my property, because they have too many trees and buildings and things. But I think that, and I've spoken to many people who are along the way of this, yes, they've said that if it was underground, they would grant the easements at no cost. If it's above ground, they're going to fight it. So, you know.
You're not saying that, some of your neighbors have told you that.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
All right, I don't think any.
So, this is for Heber Light and Power and Rocky Mountain Power. the cost that's shown on slide, whatever it was, the 8 versus 32 or 34 million, does that include easement costs? Have you estimated the cost of easements in those numbers?
No, that's just the facility,
That's the
That's just the
construction,
facilities.
materials, the facility itself.
not the land or easement.
Okay, so the point being, if you got free easements underground and very expensive easements to go overground, the delta between the two closes. Do you agree with that?
No.
Well, it's math, so.
Maybe I didn't understand the question. What I understood you ask is, if we get an underground easement for free, does it close the gap if we have to pay for overhead? And
Yes.
My answer is no, it doesn't close the gap. There's too much money there.
If it costs, let me do it a different way. If it costs $10 million to buy, and this is wildly simplified, okay, I admit. But if it costs $10 million to buy easements, you add that to the $8 million facilities cost. Now that bottom line becomes 18 million.
18 million instead of.
Right, and so 32, and for some crazy reason, it was all free. Now you've got 18 and 32, that's the delta.
That's correct.
Okay, that was my point. And so, now, do I think you're gonna get them all free? No. Do I think it's gonna cost you 10 million? I have no idea. But I'm just saying that the point that's being raised is underground might be cheaper in terms of obtaining all the necessary easements than perhaps the overground will, especially if you get into protracted legal fights, regardless of the merit of the fight. That's the only point.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, I even had one offer to donate the underground easements if they would bury the line on 650, so.
Okay, well, we don't want to commit anybody to free.
No, it's not so official, I just told him, tell Jason, he'll bury the line, I'll donate the easement.
Okay, so we-
Okay. Any other questions, please?
Yeah, this is all related to you. You saw his red rectangles for other locations, like that county location? Did you pursue that at all, or Doug, did anybody approach it?
That's where the bypass is going through.
Yeah, the bypass is going through there and heading towards the intersection of.
So that's not a viable location?
No, that's not correct.
Yeah, it is.
East, maybe.
We don't really know, but at this stage, just to be clear, the bypass is not set in stone, right? Is that accurate, Doug?
Well, down there, it's somewhat, but it is heading towards the intersection.
Okay.
And could it be further on the east side of that property, closer to Southfield? I don't know.
Okay, I think though Commissioner Jewkes earlier kind of went through did you look at alternative sites for the substation? And
Where I'm referring to, I'm sorry, the bypass road goes basically through here. This is right on the bypass road. You can make these substations longer and wider, in different shapes, and the exact location, if it's interfering with the bypass road, fine, change it. My only point was, it's a possible location, and it also ties into this north line.
okay, here's my point with all this is that may be a possibility, but we have an application before us that we need to act on or not, or either, unless they want to continue it again and they insist on us making a decision, they've explored their options, they've said this is where we can do a substation, please decide. I'll ask the question just to make sure. Are you open to continuing to explore for another month, another 2 months, other options for substations or any other location? Because earlier we established that with time, the project's gotten better. Do you want a little more time to make it even better?
I'm guessing they've already bought that. Yeah, I think
We bought the land. Also,
Okay, but let
Yeah.
Let me answer the question, maybe. I've said
Who you're
on this
representing.
commission for a long time, hearing these guys do the same thing, and we keep continuing and continuing. It's time to make a decision. That costs money. We need the power. That's what, I don't think continuing is going to solve it.
Well, I'm giving them the option if they're hearing the community.
Well, I think
one of the problems,
Jason's comment was that he had done his due diligence.
yeah, but one of the problems that comes up, and Commissioner Jewkes alluded to this, you know, it's a pretty common occurrence that, I'll preface this by saying, I don't think anybody likes these type of infrastructure projects. No, you know, no one really wants to see these facilities be put in. Everyone likes reliable power, everyone likes sufficient power, but no one likes the project. At the end of the day, infrastructure has to keep up. So this is a needed project, we have to move forward. It's very common, I experience this, we get in these meetings and people will say, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about this? We've thought about a lot of things, and if we were to go and notice over there, instead of where we notice, you'd have that group here saying, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? I think we've explored what we can explore. I agree, there were some impacts on this line that were mitigated in the 18 months or so since this was originally heard. We need to move forward. We need a decision.
Okay, that's.